Thank you, Laska Hirlik. From the outset of the COVID-19 crisis, government under the then Taoiseach, Fine Gael leader Leo Varadkar, moved to protect tenants affected by the inavailability of their opportunity to move property, and more crucially by the fact that their inability to work and the crucial protections that were needed from the inability to pay their rent brought about by the COVID crisis. That is the origin of today's legislation. The bill before this House extends the protections. It goes further all those protections were extended and extended now until April. But today's bill extends those protections, and it goes further. It decouples those protections from the need for us to be in level 5, particularly for people who are in arrears due to the COVID crisis. So the protections will still be in place for those who are adversely affected by the financial impacts of COVID and are unable to pay their rent. The protections for tenants financially impacted are extended until the 12th of July, and nothing about that prohibits us from coming back in. In the grips of a pandemic, it is right that we are proportionate and that we are responsible in how we deal with extended and enhanced protections for any sector of any market. So for those who are in arrears, they are more likely to be in the low-income industries, or those industries most affected, like hospitality and retail. They've been disproportionately affected, and their protections have now been decoupled from the level 5 requirement. What this bill doesn't protect are tenants who refuse to pay rent but can. It doesn't protect tenants who engage in antisocial behaviour, making the lives around them miserable. Tenants who are in arrears due to financial impact of COVID can make a declaration and put them on the road to enhanced protections that were made in the 2020 bill just before Christmas. That brings in anyone, according to threshold, in receipt of the temporary wage subsidy or any social welfare payment or state support paid because you lost earnings due to COVID, things like the pandemic unemployment payment, rent supplement and the supplementary welfare allowance. This bill seeks to balance the rights of those who own properties and rent them out with the rights of tenants. Landlords include a very large cohort of people who are landlords by accident, and some who have invested in one property as a pension plan. Their property rights cannot be disregarded altogether. If we were to maximise the property market choices, we need private landlords as well as the state and the approved housing bodies. A lot of those private landlords are relying on the income from the rent to earn their living and to pay their own bills. It would be reckless of this Parliament to bring forward a bill that is relying on that doesn't balance those rights and relies on an Article 26 reference to the Supreme Court by the President. That would be such an abdication of our role as legislators. Outside of these enhanced protections, if a tenant falls into arrears, their landlord must serve them with 28 days' notice. And if they don't address those arrears in a mutually agreeable fashion, then they get a further 28 days' notice to quit. So there are protections in place. If the landlord doesn't validly serve the notice or act in accordance with the statutory requirements, the tenant can refer these matters to the Residential Tenancies Board. So these rights are supported outside of COVID. These rights were there prior to COVID. Where arrears are not involved, the length of notice is directly proportionate to the length of the tenancy. And that goes from anything from 28 days to just over 6 months. So on top of that, we have rent pressure zones and we have a prohibition of rent increases of 4%. So let's be clear, it's not ideal to be renting. Tenure doesn't last long enough, even despite the provisions of 6 months. So we do need additional housing, we need approved housing. I'm really optimistic for the changes in the Land Development Agency and the Affordable Housing Bill. Fine Gael has presided over increased housing supply while in government, from which they came into government with a ruinous position, something that Senator Fitzpatrick seemed to have selective amnesia about in her constant digs about the lack of housing due to the lack of money for the first number of years of the Fine Gael in government. I welcome this bill, Minister. It restores the rights to the place they were prior to COVID. And it also keeps in place the enhanced protections for people in arrears because of COVID. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.